I've always been pretty claustrophobic. I've felt incredibly uncomfortable in elevators my whole life, and pretty much any small space. They make me feel like it's hard to breathe and the world is closing in on me. It terrifies me. In 8th grade, there was a lot of transition and change in my life. My family moved to another smaller town. I had my first sort of girlfriend. I got a dog and I became more responsible overall. A lot happened that year, some good and some very bad. I was in a class of 24 kids, some of them decent and well-behaved, and others obnoxious and horrible in every way. The teachers never saw how the kids really were. I didn't like a lot of the kids at school, and I didn't have the urge to make tons of friends. I have never been extroverted. As I walked through the halls that became gradually more similar each time, I felt something. It was an eerie feeling, and I noticed it more and more as time passed. I felt claustrophobic when I walked through the halls. The halls felt too small. It was very unsettling to me. The whole feeling I got from this school was unsettling, and I truly didn't want to be there. It was something beyond kids being hard on me or teachers being complete assholes. It was something much past that, on a different level. I was in homeroom, and we were doing math at the time. The teacher was eyeing 2 kids who were whispering and giggling to themselves during the lesson. The teacher was a man in his 50s, wearing clothes that were too big for him, and I had the feeling that he took himself too seriously. I sat right behind the kids in question, and I could pick up on a bit of what they said. It was a joke about the teacher, Mr. R. It was something about him and his wife, and I really don't care enough to try and recall more specifics than that. Mr. R stopped what he was saying about algebra and just stared at the kids. The kids were so engrossed in their conversation that they didn't notice exactly when he stopped. The whole class caught the word retarded at the end of one of their sentences, and so did Mr. R. When they stopped talking, the whole room was completely silent. This silence hung for about a full minute before anybody actually did anything. Mr. R said nothing as he reached for a bell on his desk. This bell had some sort of writing engraved in it, and it was rusting over. He rang the bell several times. And then simply set it back down. I was as confused as everyone else, and it was the strangest thing I had ever seen a teacher do. Mr. R resumed the lesson exactly where he left off, and the day went on just like any other day after that. Over the next month or so, the 2 kids were acting strange. They would ask to be excused every 15 minutes or so, and would often go home because of headaches. I walked into the bathroom one day to see the younger one of them standing in the corner, facing the wall. Near the end of this month, they acted strange in a different way. They would yell and scream at teachers, or mutter some strange things under their breath. I noticed this from both of them, and I found it to be very interesting. I only picked up a couple of things they said under their breath. "You can't let it in," and "do it," were the only things I heard them mutter. Then, they just disappeared. At the end of the month, they just vanished. It happened while they were on school property. The oldest asked to be excused from class to go to the washroom, and he did. 15 minutes later, the youngest followed. Neither of them ever came back to class. A week later, they were still nowhere to be seen. I was walking through the hall alone to the washroom, feeling the claustrophobia more than ever this time. I entered the washroom and proceeded to take a piss. When I was nearly done, I heard something. It was very indistinct, nearly indistinguishable from the other sounds of the restroom. I still knew I heard something, quiet as it may be. There was a tiny tapping noise coming from the air vent. It sounded very intentional, like someone rapping their finger on a car window to get the driver's attention, only much quieter. I finished and slowly approached the air vent, my heart beating faster than it should. I peered into the air vent, cupping my hands around my eyes. I heard a slight shuffling sound from deep in the vents, and I was beginning to back away faster than I had come. Then I heard a completely coherent whispered sentence from deep in the vents. "You can't let it in." I ran out of there as fast as I could, yelling loudly for all the classes in the hall to hear. I collapsed on the floor and began trying to calm myself, to rationalize with myself. I found that to be difficult. A week later, I was kind of recovered. I actually believed that it was just my mind playing tricks on me, however the hell that works. That night, I heard the talking from the vent. I dreamt about myself being trapped in an air vent. I was stuck in the small vent, barely able to breathe as I heard whispers from behind me. I began crawling to the exit, to safety. I heard the whispers become shouts, turning into screaming, and then something grabbed my ankle. I was entirely helpless as I was dragged deep into the darkness of the vent. You can't let it in. I woke up screaming that night, my parents rushing to my room. I told them I had a bad dream, and they tried to console me. They couldn't stop the idea of being trapped in the vent from circulating my head throughout the night. Over the next week, I rationalized the whole occurrence. My claustrophobia, combined with the disappearance of 2 classmates, had caused a minor hallucination. This made no sense to me, but somehow it set my mind somewhat at ease. For a week or so. A week passed, and it was Friday. I needed to go to the restroom, so I asked the teacher if I could go, and he said yes. I went to a different washroom than I had before, and that made me feel a little safer. I pushed open the big red metal door. Then the next. I went to a urinal and pissed again. This time, the noise I heard was sudden and caught me by surprise. I finished pissing and went to wash my hands. As I was washing my hands, I heard the noise. It was a deep, unnatural sound. Have you ever heard of throat singing? Well, it sounded similar to that, only deeper and more raspy. The sound resonated from the vent, around the room and into my terrified ears. I ran from the washroom, crying at this point. Each vent I passed on my way to the room produced the sickly sound, the type of sound that could make me vomit. I ran through the hallways, seeming to follow every step I took. I opened the door to the class and shut it behind me. I stood still for a moment, stunned as the class stared at me. Then I heard the sound again, from the vent at the back of the class. I started screaming, and the class broke out into confusion and panic. As I screamed, I saw the vent cover fall off to the floor. From the blackness of the vent, a body was shoved out by something. The body of Graham Klein fell from the vent, later recognized as the older boy of the missing two. A second or two after Graham's body fell, so did Joey's. Joey Crook, age 12, fell from the vent, landing on top of Graham. Both of their corpses had been rotting, and teeth marks were found on their arms, legs, and necks. The air vents had dried blood and rotting flesh scattered throughout. I guess the smell wasn't dead rats. Hello, listener. If you've made it this far, why not follow me on Twitter at CreepyPastaED? Don't forget to click the link to subscribe, if you dare. And if you have a creepypasta or any chilling, creepy, spine-tingling story you want to be heard, send it to CreepyPastaED@gmail.com. Look me up on the CreepyPasta Amino app. And remember,
don't fall asleep.